The elephant in the room is important because every team you run, every business you run has an elephant in the room. And if there is a problem you run into, normally you don't know how to solve it. So if you did, you would solve it, right? So I'm going to say 99% of the time, people don't know how to solve what this problem is that is the elephant in the room. That's the kicker. It's not like there are executives or leaders out there saying, hey, there's this problem, let me just leave it like that, right? A few are like that, but those few are actually not good leaders, and maybe they're slightly insane. This topic is important for you because you have your own elephant in the room, your own personal elephant. So congratulations, hope you've named it. This is the problem you don't know how to solve, but it's a big one. So a few key points about this elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the most glaring thing that if you handled it, things would be better.
This is the Being Coachable podcast with your host, Jill Chappie. Get ready to challenge your assumptions, expand your thinking, and walk away with concrete steps to help you level up your leadership, business acumen, and personal growth. It's time to get coachable.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Being Coachable podcast. I am your host, Jill Chappie, and our topic today is the elephant in the room. So today we're talking about the things we can't talk about. Do you remember the movie Jerry Maguire? And the title of the memo that he wrote was The Things We Think But Do Not Say? Yes, that's the type of thing we're talking about today, the elephant in the room in your business. But what is the elephant in the room? When you're running a team in any business, there is always an elephant in the room. It's that thing that people see or talk about, or they talk about in hushed tones, but they don't really talk about, right? So there always is one. Your job as a leader or a manager of the team is to find out what it is. What is that elephant in the room? And then do something about it by asking a lot of questions. So we're talking about the elephant in the room so that you can more quickly identify what the elephant in the room is and do something about it. So welcome to our podcast. This is again episode number 3. My name is Jill Chappie. I have been an executive coach for 24 years. I work largely with executives at the VP level and above in large technology companies, mostly SaaS companies. I started in this field by working with another executive coach, expanding a leadership development program many years ago, like 20, at a big technology company located deep in the heart of Texas. That's right. They did have offices in California, and so I had some connections in the California office in that company. And then, therefore, afterwards, most of my work became in California. And I lived in California for 20 years and was in Silicon Valley or surrounding area, Bay Area, et cetera, on average about 2 times a month for about 15 years, sometimes more, sometimes less. So I've worked with a lot of key players that you probably would know, names you would probably know at big companies in Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area, but I can't really mention those names to you. It's not really that important, but it's just important for you to know that's where my experience comes from in terms of looking at managing teams and understanding leadership, management, and executives. I do want to clarify something that I talk about, which is that I'm an executive coach, but sometimes people wonder exactly what that means. For me, in my corner of the world, I work with people at the executive level in corporations. And as I mentioned in the last podcast, I largely work with executive teams. I do a little bit of one-on-one coaching, but I honestly don't have a lot of time for it. But I help people within a corporation. So inside a corporation, I do very little of the self-pay type coaching. But most of what I talk about can apply to leaders of teams, any kind of team. So I will use executives and leaders kind of interchangeably in terms of terminology. In fact, many companies I work with call their executive team a leadership team. That's fine. It's all good by me. I don't really care what they call it. Whatever you call it, it's that important job of people managing people, of running the business, steering and guiding the ship. So from the C-suite down to managing a team in any role, this information can apply to you. So this topic of the elephant in the room is important because every team you run, every business you run has an elephant in the room. And if there is a problem you run into, normally you don't know how to solve it. So if you did, you would solve it, right? So I'm going to say 99% of the time, people don't know how to solve what this problem is that is the elephant in the room. That's the kicker. It's not like there are executives or leaders out there saying, hey, there's this problem, let me just leave it like that, right? A few are like that, but those few are actually not good leaders, and maybe they're slightly insane. This topic is important for you because you have your own elephant in the room, your own personal elephant. So congratulations, hope you've named it. This is the problem you don't know how to solve, but it's a big one. So a few key points about this elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the most glaring thing that if you handled it, things would be better. So if you handled it, things would be better. So 99% of the time, you don't know how to handle it. So, like I just said, it's not that there's this big problem sitting there and you go, oh, I know how to solve that. I just don't want to. Not at all. Quite the opposite. If you felt you had the time, the resources, the money, whatever it may be to solve this problem, believe me, you would solve it. But you don't feel that way. You feel that this is a problem that there's not much that you can do about it. So it's the unsolvable problem. And 99% of the time, you don't want to talk directly about it. And it's a little bit of this. We talked about this in the prior episode. It's like, what do you mean? What problem? I don't have a problem, right? And everyone can see it. And that's what's really interesting about these elephants in the room is that we're not talking enough about them, actually, right? So the things we think but do not say in the manifesto, not the memo, the manifesto in Jerry Maguire. A good rewatch of a movie, by the way, if you want a good movie recommendation for the week, check out Jerry Maguire. So he's trying to do an overhaul of this business that he works in, and he sees the elephant in the room. And he starts to attack the elephant in the room. And what happens in that case, unfortunately, is he gets fired. That's not what we're talking about today for you, though, because what we're talking about for your elephant in the room is you talking about it so you can solve it. Okay. We're not necessarily having you write a manifesto or a memo about this problem that you need to solve upward to your boss or manager. Why? Because that's not where we start with things. We start with elephants that we want to have you solve for yourself. All right, so another thing about these elephants is people around you notice the elephant. They talk about the elephant, they talk about parts of the elephant, but they don't handle it either, right? Because they don't know how to either. And in fact, what happens a lot is like this old joke that I'm sure you've heard. People are talking about parts of the elephant. Oh, the tail, for example. They're taking it from the tail perspective. It feels kind of like a rope with a tassel on the end. Then that's their description of the problem. Or somebody else describes it from the trunk area. Oh, it's kind of like an overly large garden hose, but it's kind of rough, sandpapery, that not really describing the problem either or describing the elephant accurately, but it is a description of it from a certain perspective. So this is what happens with the elephant in the room is that there are people who notice it, they talk about it a little bit or parts of it, but they aren't quite really getting the full picture. Why is that? Because really only you have the full picture of this elephant in the room. It's kind of like having a darkened room and you're slowly bringing the lights up. How do we bring the lights up? By communication, by talking about it. So, what's required to actually handle the elephant? Well, first of all, you're the only one who's going to solve the elephant. Okay. There isn't a coach in the world that you can call who's going to come in and haul the elephant out for you. That would actually be a very bad coach. Why? Because they're not teaching you how to handle elephants, right? Which is one of the things that you have to do as a leader or manager. You've got to learn how to solve these problems for yourself. So, a couple of things that we want to talk about with regard to the elephant. Number one, you should have an idea what the room would look like without it. So, in other words, what's an ideal situation? If I didn't have this elephant, how good would things be? And what am I unwilling to talk about or face up to about this elephant? What is it that I just kind of keep putting off or keep ignoring? What problems have I tried to solve around it that I didn't solve? How did that go? What happened there? Right? So, you want to dig in on some of this information. Now, as I started to talk about this, you might have had an idea, boom, about what your elephant in the room is. But I would bet dollars to donuts, you have not ever described that problem accurately to someone else who could do something about it or who was a part of the situation. You may have complained about it to a spouse or partner, you may have talked about it to a mentor in parts, right? But not an accurate description of this real full elephant that you have sitting there, or really narrowing down what the size, shape, and scope of that elephant is, right? So that's what we're looking to do. And how do we solve that? We have to communicate more about this elephant situation that we have. So we've tried many things usually about the elephant. So, a coach who would help you with this, potentially you need to call a coach, by the way. If you've got an elephant that you have tried to solve multiple times, it's ruining your business, and you haven't been able to fix it, you may need to call a coach or a mentor. But a coach, what does a coach bring to the table is that specific guidance around similar situations, having been through this before, seeing other types of businesses. It's very funny for me as a coach because when I give examples, I give case studies of things that occur, teams I've worked with, executives I've worked with. I get so many phone calls. Oh, I heard you talking about me in that case study. And it wasn't actually that person because there are so many similarities in the problems that occur in business. It's just really true, right? That's why there are all these business books on the market, and you can boil a lot of them down to some key bullet points, and a lot of those bullet points would match up. That's just the reality of the situation, is that there are similarities in businesses, among businesses, and in the way businesses operate and teams, right? So management, leadership, business, these all have common themes and best practices. So a coach can come in and, with a knowledge of business and an exterior perspective, take a look at this blind spot that you may have about the elephant, right? Pull it off your face a little bit, get you looking at it. And the coach is not going to solve the elephant for you. They're not going to bring in a big truck and haul out the elephant. That would actually be a bad coach, right? Again, the idea is to raise your ability to face the elephant, to communicate about the elephant, to get some solutions, something that opens the door to getting the elephant out of the room. Opens the door. I didn't say the elephant goes charging out, opens the door, because that's what usually we're missing in these unsolvable problems, these elephants in the room, is we're missing that something that would at least unlock the door to where we could let the elephant out. Okay, so what we want is for the coach to help you to bring up your level of facing up to the problem, of courage in facing the problem and communicating about the problem. The coach should get you to look at the problem in a different way, or potentially, and this is one of my favorite things to do in coaching, make the problem irrelevant because there are bigger, more exciting things to be looking at. And that's one small problem that, if we create this bigger picture, then that problem kind of goes away or goes to the side. Because sometimes, not all the time, but this does happen sometimes. Sometimes we get a little bit focused on this small room with this big elephant, when in actuality, we have a mansion, and the mansion has a lot of beautiful rooms in it. And we should be focused on some of those other rooms instead of on this tiny little room in a back closet where there's a big elephant. Now, that's not saying to ignore the elephant. It's just saying that we have to make sure that our perspective on it is right. And that's a fun thing that coaches get to help with as well. So I want to give you an example of one of these elephants in the room that I have seen in the past. Now, you may have thought, when we were starting to talk about the elephant in the room, you may have thought of your own elephant in the room. If you did, and you got it perfectly described, and you're ready to go handle it with somebody, great. I want to give you some ideas for what you can do with that next. But hang on for just a minute on that, okay? I want to give you an example of how this can go right and how it can go wrong, okay?
Are you hitting a wall as a leader? Do you need an outside perspective to gain clarity and direction? Jill Chappie has over 20 years of experience as an executive coach, helping leaders get unstuck and achieve their goals. She offers straight talk combined with empathy and humor to challenge your assumptions, expand your thinking, reveal your blind spots, and equip you with concrete action steps. If you're ready to level up your leadership and get coachable, click on Leadership Assessment at becoachable.com and then email to schedule your readout. Cost is $99 to get your results. Invest in yourself and your growth. You'll walk away feeling informed, empowered, and ready to implement change. Let's get coachable.
So, an example that I have of this is, I had a CEO who called me in to help with a team of executives where the CFO, the chief financial officer, was undermining the other executive team members. Now, this happens pretty commonly. So, here's another one of those examples where I guarantee you I'll get 5 or 6 phone calls of people saying, "Were you talking about my company?" And no, I'm probably not talking about yours. This was actually fairly early on in my career. So this was a team of 8 executives, and the chief financial officer was undermining other executive team members. Here's what the CFO was doing. CFO would walk into a meeting with the CEO, shut the door, it was just the two of them, and would say blah, 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 blah about, usually, to be quite honest, the main person the CFO was picking on was the chief operating officer, who happened to be a woman at this point. So he would talk about her, and she did blah and whatever, and would convey not only some rumor or gossip, whatever you want to call that, but also would convey sometimes some inaccurate information about things going on operationally. So this is what I want to alert you to. So when I was hired as a coach and I came in for that CEO, I asked why I was being hired. What was my charter here? What was the CEO asking me to do? And I was told it was to develop the executive team. So to make them better executives. And I went, okay. Now, most of you, if you're watching this as a coach, you know this happens a lot. You come in and you think your charter is one thing, and actually here's this elephant in the room, right? And your job as a coach is to say, hey, what about the elephant in the room? So I did that at that time. Again, this was early on in my career. This was about 15 years ago. And I was coming in from the outside. And so I poked the elephant a little bit, to be quite honest. I said to the CEO, so the CFO seems to have closed door meetings with you a lot and say negative things about the COO and some of the other executives, because it was happening to some of the other executives as well. And I just see him throwing other people under the bus. Are you seeing this as well? And I said it in a nice way, of course. I luckily didn't get fired, because that can happen. People can feel that it can happen. It very rarely happens, to be honest, that people get fired for talking about the elephant in the room. Very rarely. I've seen it maybe one time out of 100, truthfully. So it's okay to be courageous on these things, but you do have to be polite in the way that you talk about them, because if people had felt comfortable talking about the elephant in the room, they would have done so, right? So if the CEO had called me in and said, I think one of my executives is being a jerk to the other executives, I would have loved that, but it's rarely that direct. Okay, so we have to find out for ourselves, what is the shape and character and size of this elephant? So, what are some of the signs and symptoms of the elephant? So, first of all, a big problem no one's really addressing. Second of all, lots of symptoms that get talked about, usually gossip or people talking in hushed tones or talking in conference rooms behind closed doors or having the meeting after the meeting. You know what the meeting after the meeting is, right? Where it's, oh, we just had this meeting about Project X, and then we go into a closed door session and we talk about Project X some more, but without some of the other people, right? So that's an elephant in the room. There's something happening there. There's a great book called Death by Meeting where Patrick Lencioni, he's a great consultant and writer of books about business. He's talking about the fact that meetings have to have conflict or they're boring, right? And I love that concept. Why don't we just talk about the elephant in the room? No, that will not be a boring meeting. I can guarantee you that. That's one thing I can guarantee you. No boring meetings if you're talking about the elephant in the room. And it's what everybody wants to talk about anyway. And it's what they are talking about, just not in a coordinated fashion and not in a fashion that does anything about it. And that's what we want to fix, right? So we get conflict, we get gossip, we get rumors, we get low morale around this elephant. Why? Because of no communication equals low morale in the team. So the team gets downtrodden. Why? Because they have a problem they can't fix and they have something they can't communicate about. So everybody starts to get down in the mouth about it. It starts to feel very defeatist. And if it goes on long enough, really the elephant owns the room and the rest of us are leaving. That's kind of how it works. So if you see the importance of the elephant in the room, I hope you do. And I hope you're raising your courage level to face up to this elephant in the room for you. I hope you're taking a look at the elephant in the room. I hope you're thinking about how you can describe the elephant better and who you can describe it to enough that you will have that moment of, oh, here's how I could open the door to letting the elephant out, right? So continue to describe the elephant until a door opens to handle the elephant. Okay, I'm going to give you one more example where I was working with a team on a project and the project was going very poorly. It was a pilot project. It was what they called a tiger team. Like, I'm sure you've heard of tiger teams in your business. Many businesses have pilot projects or tiger teams or spin-offs or startups, they sometimes call them. This was a particular small group that was a pilot project and they were trying a new way of selling this particular product. And it just wasn't going well. It was just not turning out the results that they expected. And here is the problem, that there was a little bit of attachment by the leader to this project because the project was something that he had suggested, he had recommended it to the company, and had kind of gone to bat to get it funded. And it did get funded, of course. And now, boom, we were in a problem. And the person didn't want to, kind of out of a little bit of ego, but also just being worried about it, didn't want to mention this elephant in the room because he wanted the project to be a success. Who wouldn't want it to be a success? Of course, I get it. So, long story short, we talked about this problem from every angle and we basically resolved it down to three things. Now, there were three possible problems with this project. I'm not going to go into what they were, but then I said, great, what's the most important one? What's the one that if we solve that one, the other two problems will become irrelevant? And that's what we did, is we solved that problem. Long story short, that project took off. Okay, so it did turn around. It was, I'm not going to say it was beautiful and glorious and happily ever after right away, but it did turn around. It just took more communication and then that willingness, that courage to face up to it and say, oh, maybe there is something wrong with this project. And what's the biggest problem, and can we face that? All right. And what I will say to you is, I hope your courage has come up today in looking at the elephant, being willing to face the elephant and open that door to getting the elephant out the door. So, if you would like to get more content like this, please follow me on LinkedIn. Coachability Inc. is the company. You can follow us on LinkedIn. That's where we will have updates about the podcast. It will also be on our website, which is becoachable.com. So that's becoachable.com/podcast. You can follow our podcast updates there. You can, of course, whatever channel you're on right now, if you're on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, or if you're on YouTube, you can, of course, subscribe so you will get updates about our next podcast, which will be coming up soon, which will be episode 4. We are releasing these weekly, so you can look forward to new content. So thank you again. My name is Jill Chappie. I am an executive coach, and it's been great sharing the day with you. See you for the next podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Being Coachable podcast. I hope you found value in today's conversation. If you have any follow-up questions or want to continue the discussion, visit our website at becoachable.com and click on Contact. Join our mailing list to receive offers for reduced cost leadership assessments and team building sessions. You can also find show notes, past episode transcripts, and more resources on the podcast tab. I'll catch you on the next episode as we continue to maximize our potential and get coachable.